The message lit up my phone like a gunshot in a quiet room. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. The rain hadn't even started when I pulled into the driveway, but the sky was already the color of wet concrete. Something felt off. There was a silence to the street that didn't match a normal Friday night in our neighborhood. I should have seen it coming, their icy looks last week at Mom's wake, the way Evelyn kept my name off the obituary. But I didn't. Not then. I climbed the steps to the porch, my shoes squeaking slightly against the damp wood. When I slid my key into the door, it hit resistance. I pulled it out, tried again. Nothing. The deadbolt didn't even give a courtesy click. Confused, I reached into my coat pocket and tried the spare. Same result. My breath caught. The lights were on inside. The house looked warm. Lived in, but I was locked out. A soft rustle behind me made me turn. Mrs. Greer, the neighbor from across the street, stood at the edge of her driveway with a trash bag in hand. Her eyes flicked to me, then away, just as fast. "Evening, Claire," she said awkwardly. She shifted the bag from one hand to the other like it was suddenly burning through her skin. "Hi, Mrs. Greer. Did something happen with the locks?" She hesitated. I think the locksmith came earlier. Around noon, big van out front. I figured you knew." I didn't. But apparently everyone else did. I fumbled for my phone. A single notification blinked at me like a warning flare. It was from Evelyn. Just one line. No punctuation, no warmth. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore." For a moment, everything froze except the rain, which had started to fall in tiny, spiteful drops. I read the message again, slower this time, as if clarity would come with repetition. But it didn't. I stood there dumbfounded, letting the water soak into my coat, into my scalp. My fingers hovered over the screen. I hit call. Evelyn didn't answer. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. I called Richard next. Same result. I tried Nathan, even though I knew he wouldn't do anything. He picked up but said nothing for a beat. Then a sigh. "Claire, I think it's best you talk to Mom. She won't answer. Maybe she needs time. I need a place to sleep, Nathan." A pause. I don't know what to tell you." He hung up. I sat down on the porch step, rain falling harder now, soaking through my jeans and curling into my boots. My teeth began to chatter, not from cold, but from the adrenaline slowly burning away, leaving a raw, hollow space behind. I stared at the door, the same door I'd painted navy blue last spring after the old one cracked. I paid for that. Just like I paid for the new gutters, and the HVAC replacement, and the taxes, and the roof in 2020. This wasn't just a house. It was my house. At least it had been. The funeral had been stiff formal. Richard didn't cry. Evelyn gave a speech that sounded more like a quarterly report than a eulogy. After the burial, I'd approached them tentatively, still grieving, and mentioned I wanted to discuss the deed. "That's not appropriate right now," she said, adjusting. Richard had added, "We'll handle EV, but I had WER app." A car drove past slowly. I wiped rain from my phone screen and opened my notes app. My fingers moved without thinking. I created a new folder. Title: Proof Inside. I started jotting down everything I could remember. Repair receipts, property tax payments, utility bills in my name. I'd find them all, print them, timestamp them. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity: this wasn't over. I got up, legs stiff and cold, walked back to my car, and slid into the driver's seat. The motel near the highway would still have vacancy. It wasn't home, but it was somewhere to think, somewhere to regroup. I turned the key in the ignition and let the engine hum for a moment, headlights cutting through the blur of rain. I wasn't homeless, I was being erased, and I wasn't going to let that happen. You'd think grief would bond a family. In mine, it made them vultures. The ceiling of the motel room had a water stain that looked like a twisted map of somewhere I'd never want to go. I lay on the hard mattress, fully dressed, shoes still damp, and jacket clinging to me like a second skin. The rain outside hadn't let up. It thudded softly against the thin window glass like a metronome marking time I couldn't reclaim. Sleep wouldn't come. I wasn't even sure I wanted it to. Not when everything inside me was burning with the memory of that message. The locks might have changed yesterday, but the betrayal had been building for years. I just didn't want to see it until now. I unlocked my phone again. The screen glowed in the dark room like a flashlight in a storm cellar. I pulled up the folder I had created hours earlier, proof, and added a new note: utilities paid under my name, March 2019 to September 2023. HVAC install, $6,750. May 2021. My hands moved faster now, swiping, searching through my email. If they wanted to pretend I never existed, I'd give them something harder to erase. I paused and stared at the screen. My name wasn't just left off the obituary, it was removed from the trust. I was sure of it. Evelyn had that look in her eyes at the funeral, the same one she had when I won a spelling bee in 4th grade, and she said, "Well, Nathan got second in math. That's harder." I was 13 when I started noticing the patterns. By 20, I'd accepted that in our family, love came with quotas, and mine was always running short. It hadn't always been like that. Grandma Margaret saw me. She knew how Evelyn treated me, the silent treatments, the forced smiles that cracked at the edges. When I moved in to care for her after her second fall, she would often whisper, "You shouldn't have to carry so much." I brushed it off at the time. It didn't matter, someone had to help her, and no one else was going to. Evelyn and Richard showed up for birthdays and holidays. Nathan would breeze in and out with loud laughter and gift bags, snapping selfies next to Grandma's oxygen tank like it was a photo booth prop. But I was the one who cut the pills into halves, managed her doctor's appointments, and stayed up through her night terrors when she forgot where she was. Margaret wasn't always lucid, but when she was sharp. And she remembered. One evening in late 2020, after we'd both survived COVID in the house without help from anyone, she looked at me from her armchair and said, "I made sure things are taken care of. You'll be all right." I'd asked her what she meant. She smiled, weak but confident. "There's a trust." Updated in 2018, I left instructions. Those words echoed now louder than the rain outside. I went back into my email and typed "living trust" into the search bar. At first, nothing came up. Then, there it was. A scanned PDF from July 14, 2018. The subject line read, "In case anything happens. Love, G." I opened it with trembling fingers. Claire Whitmore, sole beneficiary. It was there in clean Times New Roman black and white, simple and binding. My name. Not Evelyn's. Not Nathan's. Mine. I sat up straighter, heart pounding like I had just uncovered a buried time capsule filled with dynamite. If this was the latest valid version of the trust, then someone had interfered with it. Someone had ignored it, hidden it, or outright changed it. That wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. Suddenly the betrayal sharpened into something colder intent. I scrolled to the bottom of the document and saw the signatures. Margaret's. A notary's stamp. And then a small line I hadn't paid attention to before: filed copy retained by Barnes & Leary LLP. I Googled the firm. Still open. Charleston, downtown. I clicked call and left a message requesting an appointment with an estate attorney. My voice was steady, formal. The kind you use when you've decided you're not begging anymore. The motel heater kicked on with a clank. I kicked off my shoes finally and let my head rest against the pillow. I didn't close my eyes. I stared at the ceiling again, this time noticing the stain looked less like a map and more like a crack in something that used to be whole. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that law office and ask the questions they clearly hoped I wouldn't. Evelyn may have changed the locks, but she couldn't change the paper trail, couldn't wipe away years of caregiving or rewrite Grandma's last wishes with a lawyer's pen. They changed the locks, But I still had the keys. They couldn't touch memories, documents, and the truth. The lawyer blinked twice before saying, "You're telling me they didn't notify you of probate?" I clutched my bag tighter, as if the weight of the documents inside could anchor me against the swirl of disbelief now filling the quiet room. The law office was brighter than I'd expected, sleek glass pale wood and framed diplomas neatly lining the walls, but despite its clean lines, everything felt suffocating. Maybe it was the realization that the betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was procedural. It was calculated. Barbara Longwell tapped the printout of the trust I'd handed her. Her pen hovered above it, then clicked shut with finality. "Claire," she said slowly, "this is a legitimate document. Notarized, signed, dated. If this is the most recent version of your grandmother's trust and no new version supersedes it, then you are on paper the sole beneficiary." I swallowed. "Then how did they—" She glanced at her monitor. "Let's find out." Barbara's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. I watched her brow tighten as she pulled up the Charleston County Court filings. Her screen reflected faintly in her glasses. "No open probate under Margaret Whitmore," she murmured. "And certainly nothing naming you." "But that doesn't make sense," I said. "They took over the house, changed the locks, threw me out without even pretending to ask. Shouldn't there be something official on record in theory?" She replied, "No. If a trust was set up and fully funded, meaning the house was placed into the trust, then it should bypass probate entirely. That's the point of a living trust. It transfers ownership directly without court involvement. But I never signed anything. I never even saw anything. Evelyn and Richard just acted like they owned it the second Grandma passed." Barbara pursed her lips. "That's the issue. For them to have done anything with the house legally, they'd have needed either your permission or proof that you'd relinquished your rights. Did you ever sign a waiver?" "No." My answer was instant. No phone call, no meeting, nothing. She nodded. "Then either they forged something, or they're counting on you not knowing what you're entitled to." The rain from earlier had eased, but my pulse hadn't. I could still feel my heart thudding from the motel to here. I handed her my folder, every bill, tax receipt screenshot, every line of paper that tied me to that house like invisible thread. Barbara flipped through the documents with the eye of someone trained to find flaws. "These are helpful," she said. "Very helpful. They show a pattern of contribution. Even if your name isn't on the title yet, this proves you acted as a de facto owner." I sat back slightly, the leather chair groaning under my weight. Grandma always said, "Put it in writing. Feelings fade, but paper talks." I gave a small laugh, but it came out jagged. "She was right," Barbara said. "And luckily for you, she did." A knock at the door interrupted us. A young clerk stepped in with a small folder. "Pulled the latest property transfer for 226 Rosewood Drive," he said. Barbara took it, brows arching as she read. "Filed the week after your grandmother's death," she said, then paused. "Claire, this document lists a quitclaim deed transferring the house to Evelyn Whitmore and Richard Whitmore. And it has a signature from you." My blood turned to ice. I never signed anything. Barbara's jaw set. "Then we may have a forgery." She stood, walked to the copier, and scanned the page onto her screen. "I'll have a handwriting analyst look at this. But even at a glance, if that signature isn't yours and you can prove it, this deed falls apart. And with the trust favoring you, everything reverts." I stared at her. "So, they stole the house." In plain terms, Barbara leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Yes. And if you're willing to fight, I think we can burn this to the ground. They were already selling the house, as if I'd never existed." I was driving back from Barbara Longwell's office when I made the mistake of turning down Rosewood Drive. Old habit, maybe. Or maybe it was something more primal, like a wounded animal circling the place it had been hunted. Whatever the reason, I pulled to the curb and stared engine idling at what used to be my home. The white two-story still had the sagging shutters I'd meant to repaint in the spring. The rose bush by the mailbox had overgrown wild and heavy with blooms that clashed with the stark, brutal reality standing on the front lawn, a fresh for sale sign gleaming in red and white. I slammed the brakes and parked halfway onto the curb. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure with a price tag. My heart hammered as I got out of the car, my shoes crunching against wet leaves. I walked closer as if proximity might make it less real. The sign listed a local realtor I recognized from bus stop ads. I yanked out my phone and pulled up Zillow. The listing had just gone live that morning. Charming colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac. Recently updated. Perfect for families or short-term rental investors. My chest clenched. I scrolled through the photos. My grandmother's living room, where I used to read to her while she dozed, was now staged with soulless beige furniture and fake ficus trees. The walls I had painted myself during one of Evelyn's week-long self-care retreats were now whitewashed. No mention of the built-in bookshelves I'd installed. No trace of the woman who had made that house a home. Then I saw it. Guest suite with potential for Airbnb, the caption read under a photo of my childhood bedroom. My bed was gone, replaced by some sterile queen-sized mattress. The window seat cushions were stripped, the bookshelf filled with neutral pottery instead of my dog-eared novels. It was as if I had never lived there, as if I had never mattered. I clicked into the disclosure documents. The deed listed Evelyn and Richard Whitmore as sole owners. No mention of the trust. No note about legal disputes. Nothing. The disclosure form was signed electronically 2 days after Margaret's funeral. I leaned against the side of my car, the phone hot in my hand. I remembered repainting the living room 3 summers ago. Evelyn had come back from a spa trip and barely glanced at it. Too dark, she'd muttered. That was her way acknowledge only enough to diminish. I opened the voice memo app and began dictating. October 29th. Found Zillow listing live. House marketed under false claim of sole ownership. Disclosure omits trust and probate conflict. My voice trembled, but not from sadness. It was rage, now measured, sharpened. I drove to a coffee shop with strong Wi-Fi and ordered something hot I wouldn't drink. I sat in a corner booth, spreading out my laptop, phone, and notepad like a war table. One by one, I began collecting screenshots listing page public tax records. My scanned trust copy, old photos of Margaret and me in the same rooms now scrubbed of warmth. Then I opened a new file timeline of fraud. I color-coded each entry, emails in yellow, legal documents in blue, photos in green. Every piece of paper they ignored or twisted was now pinned into place like evidence in a courtroom I would drag them into if I had to. I added a memory I hadn't thought of in years. Margaret sitting on the porch in her lavender sweater, her voice thin but clear. This house will always be yours if you want it to be. She didn't mean yours as in legal documents. She meant it in the way only a grandmother can. That this was the place I was safe. That I had earned it not with money but with time, care, and love. And now they were auctioning it off like a used couch. Barbara had warned me that this could be the start of something long and vicious. She said if Evelyn and Richard sensed I was pushing back, they might escalate. But I didn't care. I had lived too long in the shadows of their manipulation. They could sell furniture, hide photos, whitewash walls, but they couldn't rewrite what had actually happened. Selling that house wasn't just a betrayal of Grandma's wishes. It was fraud, plain, criminal fraud. They had crossed a line. If they wanted a clean sale, I'd give them a dirty fight. I wasn't just fighting for bricks and walls, I was fighting to prove I ever mattered. The bell above the diner door jingled as I stepped inside, already soaked from the drizzle that hadn't stopped since morning. It was the kind of place that smelled like old coffee and fried bacon no matter the hour, the kind of place Grandma Margaret used to swear had the best cornbread in Charleston. Today, I wasn't here for food. I spotted Gloria Kemp immediately. She hadn't changed. Her short silver bob was tucked neatly under a wool hat, and her lipstick was a shade of red so bold it almost dared you to disagree with her. She waved me over with the same energy she used to greet Grandma at the church bake sales. "Claire Whitmore," she said, standing to hug me before I'd even shrugged off my coat. "You're thinner than you should be. Grief will do that. Sit down, sweetheart." I slid into the booth across from her. The vinyl seat hissed beneath me. "Thanks for meeting me. I should have reached out sooner." She said, her voice softer now. But I wasn't sure if Evelyn had already. Well done what she always does. I looked up. Pretend I don't exist. Gloria's eyes sharpened. Exactly. The waitress brought 2 coffees without us having to ask. Gloria stirred hers, clinking the spoon against the cup like a metronome. Margaret would be sick over what's happened. That house was never supposed to go to Evelyn. "You know that, don't you?" "I thought I did," I said quietly. "But it's hard to trust anything right now." Gloria reached into her oversized tote and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Your grandmother knew Evelyn would pull something. She didn't know what form it'd take, but she was prepared." I hesitated before opening it. Inside were printed emails, some formal, others more candid. All of them were between Margaret and her lawyer, spanning the last 3 months of her life. Dates, subject lines, attachments. My name appeared again and again. She updated her trust in 2018, Gloria said, but she reconfirmed everything as recently as August. This, she tapped the folder, includes direct communication with her estate attorney. She named you as sole heir again. No ambiguity. I turned to one message dated September 2nd. "If Evelyn asks for updates on the trust, decline politely. She cannot be trusted to prioritize family over image. Claire has earned the house in every way that matters." I blinked. My throat tightened. Seeing those words on paper made it real in a way nothing else had. It wasn't just sentiment, it was proof. "She wrote those after Evelyn threw a tantrum over Nathan's credit card debt," Gloria added. "Did you know Margaret paid it off quietly?" Evelyn found out and accused her of spoiling failure. "Your brother didn't even thank her." But Margaret, she saw through it. Through all of them. The words swirled in my head. I always suspected Margaret was disappointed in Evelyn, but hearing it, seeing it, was like stepping onto solid ground after weeks of drowning. Another email stood out. Dated just 2 weeks before Margaret died. "Evelyn is emotionally dangerous. If anything happens to me, Claire will need help. She won't see it coming." I stared at it. Time-stamped, direct, impossible to twist. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. Gloria sat up straighter. "Because Margaret was my best friend, and because she was right. Evelyn is a master at appearances, but underneath, it's all rot. She did the same thing to her sister years ago, cut her out of the family business when no one was looking. No one talks about it. But I remember." I closed the folder gently like it was something sacred. "This helps more than you know." "I'm not done helping," Gloria said. "But take this step by step. And remember what your grandmother always told me. A lie might win the day, but the truth always wins the war." I gave a small, exhausted smile. She said that to me, too. We finished our coffee mostly in silence. Outside, the clouds had started to break. Just a hint of light pushed through the gray. I slipped the folder into my bag and stood to leave. It wasn't just about the house. It was about exposing the rot they'd buried for years. The file sat on my desktop, Trust Margaret Final.pdf. I wasn't just reading evidence, I was loading a weapon. The rain outside thumped against the motel window in a slow, steady rhythm. I had stopped noticing the chill in the room days ago. My coffee had gone cold long before I remembered to sip it. The cheap desk was littered with sticky notes, manila folders, and charging cables. This wasn't a place to rest, it was a battlefield staging ground. I double-clicked the file and stared at the notarized pages for the 100th time. Every line Margaret had signed felt like a whisper from her, a refusal to let me disappear. Each clause reinforced what I already knew deep in my bones: I was never meant to be cast out. I was never meant to be forgotten. Barbara had warned me. Organize everything. We can't fight a war with scattered bullets. So I got methodical. I opened a spreadsheet titled Evidence Timeline and began sorting. Receipts from Home Depot when I fixed the back porch in 2019. Emails where I scheduled plumbing repairs. PDF scans of insurance bills paid from my checking account. Screenshots of utilities in my name. It was tedious, maddening, and somehow healing. Then came the trust documents. I scanned the 2018 copy again. Margaret's signature, notarized seal, the clause naming me as sole beneficiary. There it was plain and legal. But it wasn't just about showing I was named, it was about showing they knew it and ignored it. Barbara had already filed a preliminary cease and desist with the listing agent citing disputed ownership. It wouldn't stop the sale entirely, but it would throw sand in their gears. A delay was all I needed to widen the cracks. In the storage bin at the foot of the motel bed sat Margaret's old laptop, still functional miraculously. She'd always been protective of her things, even tech. Password was her birthday backwards. I scrolled through the desktop and found a folder labeled Claire Letters. My breath caught. Most were Word docs, unsent notes addressed to me, some to Evelyn, some without any name at all. One stood out. If they push Claire away, read this. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a letter. It was a voice memo. I clicked play. Margaret's voice filled the room, throaty, deliberate, tinged with fatigue, but unmistakably her. If you're hearing this, Evie's done something cruel. You don't let her win. Silence. Then more. Claire, you've given up more than anyone knows. You stayed when I couldn't climb stairs. You paid for things I never asked you to. You loved me without needing to be thanked, and I saw every moment of it. I leaned closer as if I could reach her through the speakers. Evelyn believes family is a competition. She always has. But you, her voice broke, you knew that love was service. If she shut you out, it's because she's scared of your light. The memo ended abruptly. No goodbyes, no wrapping bow. Just truth, raw and unpolished. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I added a new tab to the spreadsheet: voice evidence. They'd erased me from the house, but Margaret left me a map, and I was finally reading it. I didn't need to kick down their door. I only needed to let a little truth slip through the cracks. The sky was still bruised with early morning haze when I stepped out of the motel, manila envelope in hand. My breath fogged in the cold air as I made my way to the mailbox 2 streets over, the one with no camera, no neighbors awake, just anonymity. Inside the envelope was a single sheet, page 4 of Margaret's trust, the one naming me sole beneficiary with her signature, and the notary seal as crisp as the day it was scanned. No return address, no note. Just the one truth Evelyn couldn't ignore. I dropped it in and walked away. Heart steady, steps slow. This wasn't revenge, it was strategy. Back at the motel, I sipped lukewarm coffee as I opened my burner email and logged into a local real estate forum. Using an alias, I posted in a thread about recent Charleston listings. FYI, property at 73 Litchfield may have undisclosed air complications. Check the trust before closing. It was just enough to seed doubt. I didn't need the whole town to know yet. Just one whisper in the right place. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. Barbara had forwarded me a screenshot from the listing agent. Client requests immediate pause on all showings. Family matter. Will reschedule next week. Barbara's message beneath it read, "Did you do something?" I smiled. Maybe I typed back, just tugging a loose thread. Around noon, my motel room door creaked open with the sound of wind pushing against the frame. I sat at the desk reviewing timeline files when the notification pinged on my laptop. An email from Evelyn. My heart stuttered. Subject line, Claire. I clicked. You're making a mistake. That was all it said. No greeting, no warmth, no apology. But it was more than silence. It was acknowledgement. It was fear. I read it twice, then a third time. My pulse slowed. She broke silence. That meant one thing: she was scared. Their lawyer called mine at 8:06 a.m. The war wasn't coming. It had already started. Barbara's voice was calm but sharp when she picked up my call. Claire, they've retained counsel, a Mr. Harris. He just left a message demanding you stop harassing the sellers and cease further interference. She paused. You've rattled them. I sat in the corner of Barbara's office, rain streaking the windows like veins. The city felt quieter than usual, maybe because it was Thanksgiving week. Maybe because something ugly had just been unwrapped. He used the phrase, no standing, Barbara added, which tells me they're afraid you might. The email she forwarded from Harris was classic intimidation, sterile phrases wrapped around veiled threats. He accused me of causing emotional distress to the surviving family and suggested I was acting out of disrupted grief, not legal reason. It would have been funny if it wasn't so calculated. Barbara didn't laugh. He's deflecting. That tells me they're hiding something. It's time we go on offense. By noon, we had filed a formal petition to freeze any real estate transfer citing a disputed trust and Claire Whitmore's legal interest as sole named beneficiary. It was a small move on paper, but a flare in a dark sky. The court stamped the freeze by 2:47 p.m. Later, we visited the courthouse records office together. A sleepy clerk named Neil flipped through manila folders while Barbara scanned the system database. I watched as her brows pulled tight. Something's off, she muttered. The only will on file is from 2015. But the trust you brought me is dated 2018. Neil looked up. That's all we have. Nothing more recent was ever submitted. Barbara stared at the screen, which means someone suppressed the newer one. My mouth felt dry. They filed an outdated will to bypass the trust. If that's true, we're looking at deliberate concealment, Barbara said, already reaching for the subpoena forms. We need access to Margaret's personal records, her attorney, her safe, anything. As Barbara filed the motion, my phone buzzed with an alert. A local blog had posted a real estate update: quiet delays in Charleston's Westwood area. I didn't need to click. I knew the address was ours. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the stiff motel mattress laptop, casting a cold blue glow on my face, replaying Margaret's voice in my head. If they push you away, don't let them win. They buried the 2018 trust. I'd dig it up no matter how many lies were piled on top. Claire Whitmore has a documented history of instability, their lawyer said. I nearly laughed. It was Evelyn's voice in his mouth. Barbara's jaw twitched as she read through the opposition's latest motion. We were seated in the prep room she reserved for tense mornings: white walls, a dented Keurig, and enough fluorescent lighting to bleach the emotion from your face. But I felt every word they'd written like a fresh slap. They've attached summaries from your therapy records, she said carefully. From last winter. The sessions after Margaret passed. I closed my eyes, bile rising. They're calling grief a breakdown. They're calling you unreliable and emotionally reactive. Barbara's voice was clipped, her eyes sharp. Claire, this is personal and strategic. They want the judge to see you as hysterical. I'm not surprised, I said flatly. Evelyn used to say that every time I disagreed with her. You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. I shook my head. She gaslighted me so often I started to believe her. Barbara leaned forward. Do you want me to request the documents be sealed? No, I said quietly. Let them try. Let them put my pain on record. I'm not ashamed of surviving. Later, back in the motel, I curled up on the threadbare armchair with my laptop balanced on one knee. Rain dripped from the window frame onto a warped coffee table. I opened a blank document. Declaration of Claire Whitmore. I stared at the blinking cursor. My fingers hesitated, but only for a moment. I wrote about holding Margaret's hand through her last surgeries, about how I managed her medications when she couldn't remember her name, about filing her property taxes from my own account. I didn't write it like a legal brief. I wrote it like a daughter who loved served and never ran. Halfway through, my inbox pinged. It was from a name I didn't recognize. Jean W. Subject line from Margaret's journal. I clicked. A scanned page in Margaret's handwriting filled my screen. Her writing was steady, the ink dark blue. Claire is the only one who listens. Evelyn says I'm paranoid, but Claire understands. She's my compass when the days blur. I blinked hard. Jean's note followed. Margaret asked me to keep a few things in case you ever needed them. I think now's the time. Barbara would call it hearsay. I called it truth, etched in ink. I called Nathan. He answered on the second ring, voice clipped. Claire, I know what they're doing. And I know you know. A pause. You shouldn't be doing this. I'm not doing anything I said. I'm just refusing to disappear. I hung up before he could answer. His silence told me everything. That night, I finished my declaration. It was messy, raw, imperfect. But it was mine. If they were going to twist my pain into a weapon, I'd forge it into a blade. Margaret Whitmore signed October 17, 2018. The ink was faded, but the signature undeniable. The key Gloria had handed me weeks ago, small brass worm from being clasped in my palm, slid into the padlock with a click. Rain lashed sideways across the storage lot, Charleston's December chill clawing through my coat. The metal door screeched as I lifted it open. Cold air poured out, smelling like cardboard, old perfume, and time. I flicked on the flashlight from my phone. The beam danced across rows of boxes marked tax photos holiday. I moved slowly, breath fogging in the damp air. This wasn't just a storage unit, it was Margaret's memory bank, and maybe her last line of defense. I opened one box at a time, careful, methodical. A framed photo of us at the state fair. Receipts from 2009. A jewelry tin. In the third box, under a yellowed shawl and Margaret's church bulletins, I found it. Her leather organizer. It was navy blue with worn edges, the kind of thing she used to carry to legal appointments, always zipped and polished. My heart thumped as I placed it gently on the folding table I'd dragged in earlier. My fingers hesitated before unzipping it. Inside, between insurance policies and medical directives, was a clear plastic sleeve. A document sat within. Heavy bond paper. The top line, Revocable Living Trust of Margaret E. Whitmore, dated October 17, 2018. Her signature scrawled across the bottom beside a notary stamp and witness initials. Every page intact. Every clause clear. My name, my full legal name, was listed as sole beneficiary of the estate, including the home assets and personal effects. My hands trembled. Tucked behind the final page was a handwritten note in Margaret's familiar script. I read it aloud, her voice echoing in my memory. Evie will fight this. Stay steady. You earned everything in here. Tears prickled behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I tucked the trust back into its sleeve, slid it into my bag, and zipped the organizer closed. The rain had slowed when I stepped out of the unit. Clouds hung low, heavy with unshed storms. But something in my chest had shifted. For weeks, I'd chased shadows, rumors, digital files, and scanned copies. Now I held the original, the very paper they had pretended didn't exist. No more speculation. No more silence. Let them come for me now. I wasn't just ready. I was loaded for war. The judge looked over his glasses. Ms. Whitmore, are you prepared to proceed? I stood. More than ever, Your Honor. The courtroom wasn't grand. It had no marble columns, no gavel slams echoing like thunder. Just beige walls, stale air, and a quiet tension sharp enough to cut bone. But in that space on that date, It might as well have been the center of the universe. Judge Miller's gaze settled on me. He was older, perhaps, mid-60s, with steel-gray hair and a voice that commanded attention without raising a decibel. I met his eyes and nodded once. Barbara stood beside me, impeccably tailored in navy and charcoal, calm as always. Her briefcase clicked open like a lock being picked, and she approached the bench with precision. Your Honor, we are presenting today a certified and notarized copy of the 2018 Living Trust of Margaret E. Whitmore, in which my client, Miss Claire Whitmore, is named sole beneficiary. She laid the document on the bench as though it were a sacred text. Across the aisle, Mr. Harris barely hid his frown. His suit was more expensive than Barbara's, but less honest. He adjusted his cufflinks like they were armor. I must object, he said, walking forward. This document appeared suspiciously late in proceedings. We question its authenticity. Judge Miller raised a hand. You'll have your chance to rebut, Mr. Harris, but the document is notarized. That carries weight in this court. He turned to Barbara. Counselor, continue. Barbara took a measured breath. We have supporting evidence, digital backups, email chains from Ms. Whitmore's grandmother, and voice recordings from the decedent herself, indicating clear intent to pass her estate to my client. Furthermore, we argue that any actions taken by the defendants, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore and Mr. Richard Whitmore, without acknowledging this trust, constitute willful disregard of legal directives. My mother didn't flinch. Her expression was practiced, almost smug, but her hand tightened around her purse strap. Beside her, Richard shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Mr. Harris tried to recover. This trust could be a fabrication. Documents can be forged. We request a handwriting expert and full authentication. We welcome it, Barbara replied smoothly. And while the expert reviews, we request an injunction halting any pending sale of the property. Judge Miller leaned back, tapping the trust pages with one finger. Motion granted. Temporary injunction in place. The house does not change hands until this matter is resolved. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Family, friends, maybe realtors or curious clerks. Evelyn's smile, once practiced, cracked just slightly. Her eyes locked on me for the first time. I didn't look away. I'd like to submit a supplemental document, I said, stepping forward. My voice was calm. A handwritten letter from my grandmother dated November 2022. It was included in the same file folder as the original trust. Judge Miller gestured. Proceed. I walked to the stand and unfolded the letter. The ink had faded, but Margaret's cursive was unmistakable. Evie, I read aloud, if you push Claire out of this house, you will lose me forever. I raised you both, but only one of you stayed when it mattered. The courtroom fell so quiet you could hear the ceiling fan hum. Evelyn's lips parted just slightly. Her control, always meticulous, faltered. Richard shifted again and stared at the table in front of him like it might split open. Judge Miller nodded. This will be reviewed. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks after all parties submit supplemental evidence. Court adjourned. The gavel tapped once. Clean. Final. But the war had only just begun. Barbara leaned toward me. Well done. As the courtroom emptied, Evelyn didn't approach me. She didn't even glance in my direction. That was fine. Evelyn still didn't know. I had another card to play, and it was going to hurt. I watched Evelyn whisper to Richard, her lips taut. This wasn't a defense. It was damage control. The courtroom felt colder today. Not because of the weather, it was a clear December morning, but because the tension no longer simmered. It snapped, sparked, cut. Evelyn wore a navy blazer like armor, but no matter how straight she sat, I saw the twitch in her fingers, the darting glance toward the back of the room. Judge Miller called the hearing back into session. His tone was sharp but fair. We'll resume with audio evidence submitted by petitioner's counsel. Barbara nodded and pressed play on the small speaker set on the desk. The static cleared and Evelyn's voice filled the room, low, urgent, unmistakably hers. I don't care what Margaret wanted. Claire doesn't deserve that house. She'll waste it just like she wasted her life babysitting a dying woman. A gasp audible from somewhere in the back row. My stomach turned, but I didn't flinch. I'd already lived that truth. Now others had to hear it. Barbara stepped forward. Your Honor, this recording was made legally. It was saved on Margaret Whitmore's home device now in my client's possession. Time-stamped dated October 2023, just days before Ms. Whitmore's passing. Mr. Harris stood red-faced. Your Honor, that could be doctored. We haven't verified. Judge Miller raised a hand. We will verify. For now, let's hear the next witness. The bailiff opened the side door and in walked Gloria Kemp. Evelyn's posture snapped rigid. Gloria wore a dark green shawl and walked with purpose. She nodded respectfully at the judge, then glanced at me. There was no fear in her. Ms. Kemp, Barbara began. Do you recognize the voice in that recording? I do. That's Evelyn Whitmore. Gloria said, her voice crisp. And I remember that day. She came to Margaret's porch ranting about how Claire was a parasite. She said she'd get rid of every scrap that had Claire's name on it. I was sitting just behind the garden fence. I heard it all. Evelyn muttered something under her breath. The judge tilted his head. Excuse me? Lies, Evelyn hissed. That old bat would say anything. Gasps again, this time louder. Judge Miller frowned. Miss Whitmore, you'll maintain decorum or be held in contempt. Richard shifted eyes, darting between his wife and the floor. Judge Miller turned to him next. Mr. Whitmore, your earlier deposition claimed you were unaware of any alternate trust. Do you maintain that statement? Richard didn't answer immediately. Barbara spoke. We'd like to submit supplemental sworn testimony from Mr. Whitmore. Richard finally looked up. His voice was soft. Evelyn took the original, the one Margaret was going to re-sign. She said if it disappeared, there'd be nothing to contest. Evelyn spun toward him, eyes wide. You said you'd keep your mouth shut. I didn't know it would come to this. He snapped back. I didn't sign up to erase our daughter. The room was dead silent. Even Mr. Harris didn't speak. Judge Miller leaned forward. So you admit Ms. Evelyn Whitmore intercepted the legal documentation meant to reflect the decedent's wishes. Richard gave a slow, reluctant nod. And then Evelyn exploded. She was old, she shouted, standing. She wasn't thinking clearly. She didn't know what she was doing anymore. Claire had brainwashed her. Her voice echoed across the courtroom. No one spoke. Even the air held its breath. Evelyn stood there, breathing hard, waiting for someone, anyone, to agree. But the judge only lifted his brow. You're suggesting that your own mother was mentally incompetent when drafting a notarized legal document, but competent enough to justify withholding it. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Richard, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Then at me. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because that sentence was her shooting herself in the foot. And she knew it. By the time we left the courthouse, the media had caught wind. Evelyn's perfect world was fracturing. I didn't do anything to tip them off. Someone must have been watching that courtroom, or maybe a clerk leaked it. Doesn't matter. What matters is that by morning, a whisper had turned into a headline. Local heiress locked out of inheritance, family scandal at Whitmore Estate. I woke to the notification blinking on my prepaid phone. Then came the second one, and the third. The first post was from a local community forum, a photo of Evelyn walking briskly to her car, head down, face flushed. The caption read, "Not so smug now, huh?" Another linked to a blog speculating on the trust dispute, Claire Whitmore, estranged daughter or rightful heir. The digital wildfire spread quickly. By mid-morning, a regional news outlet published a piece titled CEO Implicated in Alleged Estate Misappropriation. Richard's name was now officially on record. And corporate PR departments don't like mess. I imagined the boardroom at his firm where polished executives sat behind glass walls whispering about reputational risk and optics. A leaked internal email surfaced. Until the matter is resolved, Mr. Whitmore will step back from public-facing duties. I didn't need to celebrate. The silence from my parents was celebration enough. Later that day, I stopped by a local bakery not to hide, but to breathe. An elderly woman at the next table leaned over and said, "You're the granddaughter, right, Margaret's girl?" I nodded cautiously. "She was proud of you. Talked about you more than anyone." My throat tightened. I hadn't expected that. I'd built defenses for courtrooms and legal briefs, not for kindness in pastry shops. Meanwhile, Evelyn was drowning. Neighbors whispered. A woman from her bridge club left a scathing comment under the HOA's Facebook post. What kind of mother evicts her grieving child? Her yoga studio paused her membership pending internal review. Her online presence, once carefully curated with polished selfies and garden brunches, now simmered with hidden edits and deleted posts. I received a call just after 4 p.m. I knew the number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "Claire, can we talk about what just us? Not lawyers, not court. Just you and me." Her tone cracked near the end. For a second, I heard the same woman who once braided my hair before school who bought me lemon bars when I passed my driving test. But it passed. I looked out the motel window as Doctor, "I'm not obligated to protect your secrets anymore," I said. There was a pause half a second too long. Then the line went dead. But before it cut off, I heard something. Not words. Just breathing. Shaky, uneven, like someone cornered trying to find oxygen. That sound said more than her voice ever could. She wasn't just losing. She was unraveling. Letter. I walked into the house I once called mine. It smelled of old cedar and something else, closure. The key slid in without resistance. A court order had granted me temporary re-entry until the estate was formally transferred, but it wasn't about possession anymore. It was about presence. The air was still the way only an empty home in January could be. Snow muffled the outside world, and for once there was no echo of footsteps I feared or words I braced for. Margaret's house. My house hadn't changed much. The wallpaper still peeled near the hallway light switch where I once taped up my college acceptance letter. The same worn couch sagged in the middle cushion. Her Afghan, the faded green one, lay folded on the recliner's arm. I didn't sit down. Not yet. Instead, I walked room to room with a quiet that felt earned. In the bedroom, I opened the tall cherrywood armoire she'd always kept locked. The smell of her perfume powder and lilac rose faintly. Inside was a shoebox wrapped in ribbon. A diary rested inside its leather, cracked and soft. The pages whispered as I turned them. Toward the end, dated just months before she passed, I read, "Claire is the only reason I kept going this past year. She reminds me that love is action, not ceremony." I closed the book with shaking hands and set it back where I found it. Then I exhaled for what felt like the first time all month. That afternoon, Barbara stopped by with papers in hand and her usual black coffee. She sat at the kitchen island scanning the granite she once called tastefully outdated. "We could still sue for damages," she said, sipping. "Defamation, emotional distress, loss of use. You'd win most of them." "I know," I said, tracing the pattern on the counter. "But I think I already have." She gave a small nod, not pressing. "If you ever change your mind, the clock's ticking." After she left, I stayed by the kitchen window. Snow dusted the backyard where I once helped Margaret plant rose bushes. I remembered her laughing when I overwatered them and drowned the roots. "Don't try so hard, sweetheart," she'd said. "Love doesn't need that much control." Later, I heard a knock on the front door. It was Mrs. Langford, the neighbor with the tabby cat Margaret always fed bits of ham. She held out a small ceramic angel. "She lent this to me during my chemo. Said I needed it more than her," she said. "I think it belongs with you now." I took it gently. "Thank you." Before leaving, she added, "Your grandma. She was proud of the woman you became. even if the rest of them pretended not to see it. I stood in the hallway that night staring at the door to Margaret's room. I opened it one last time. The bed was made, the quilt pulled tight. Her glasses sat beside a closed book on the nightstand. A candle half used sat in a dish she'd once told me belonged to her mother. I stepped inside, touched the bedpost, then reached for the light switch. Click. I shut the door and turned the key. I wouldn't open it again. I didn't need to stay here to prove anything anymore. At the deed office, they handed me the title. My name alone printed in black ink. I ran my thumb across the smooth paper over the line that once held someone else's claim to this home. No longer. The transfer was complete. The courthouse clerk offered me a polite smile, unaware that this piece of paper represented 5 years of caretaking a dozen court filings and the shattering of illusions I'd carried since childhood. "Congratulations, Ms. Whitmore," she said, placing a stamped copy into a manila folder. "Thank you," I replied, voice steady, almost soft. Barbara met me outside her wool coat buttoned high against the wind. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I think I'm finally allowed to be." We didn't go back to the house that day. Instead, I turned my focus to what mattered next. A week later, I hosted a memorial. Not a funeral, not a legal obligation, just a gathering of the people who had loved Margaret without agenda. I set up folding chairs in the community center's garden room, filled a table with photographs and her favorite lemon bars. Gloria brought her worn copy of the gardening book they used to swap notes in, and Mrs. Langford brought the tabby cat who sat patiently by the fireplace the entire time. There was no podium. I didn't need one. I simply stood by the photo table and read the final page from Margaret's diary. "Su that joy ki jen muon, nung no luon jen." Truth sometimes arrives late, but it always arrives. No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence was its own benediction. Afterward, people lingered. One neighbor, a woman I barely knew but who had attended out of quiet respect, came up to me as she placed a hand on the back of a chair. "Margaret would be proud," she said. I smiled. She already knows. There were no flowers from Evelyn, no apology letter, no appearance. She'd vanished into silence the moment the court decision became public. Richard had quietly resigned from his executive post, citing family health issues. I never heard from Nathan again. The void they left wasn't painful, it was clean. Back at the house that night, I walked through the rooms not as a survivor, but as the rightful heir. I changed the locks again, not out of paranoia, but for ceremony. Each click of the screwdriver felt like a final word written in a long, tangled letter. I sat in the front room, firelight flickering. On the coffee table sat the keys, not to the house, but to my life. They once tried to strip me of everything, my history, my place, even my name. But the thing about roots, they don't die just because someone pretends not to see them. They grow deeper. As the embers dimmed, I looked at the new deed again. It wasn't about land. It wasn't even about justice anymore. It was about Margaret. About love returned in full. About no longer having to fight to prove I belonged. And if anyone ever dared again to try and lock me out, now they're the ones without a key. She walked out of that courthouse not with vengeance in her hands, but with justice beneath her feet. What was taken from her voice, home dignity, had been reclaimed one truth at a time. Because when betrayal is met with persistence and silence is shattered by courage, even the most carefully buried lies can't survive daylight. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story struck a chord, like, share and comment below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if the ending left you wanting more.